Ryan Harris had always been a practical man. He grew up in a quiet town in Ohio, where everything seemed to follow a predictable path: school, college, a steady job. He wasn't the kind of guy who dreamed big. He wasn't chasing wealth or adventure. Stability was his currency, and he valued it above everything. After college, he landed a decent job as an accountant at a manufacturing company in Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, gave him structure, and allowed him to build the life he thought he wanted. And then there was Megan. He met her at a work conference in Cincinnati. Megan was different from anyone he'd ever known. Bold, confident, and with a fiery ambition that seemed to light up every room she walked into. She worked in marketing, the kind of job that seemed designed for someone like her, someone who thrived on creativity and challenge. They hit it off quickly, and before Ryan knew it, his previously uneventful life became something much more complicated. It started with casual lunches, then dinners. Soon enough, they were inseparable. Megan made him feel alive in a way that no spreadsheet or financial report ever could. She was the kind of person who pushed him out of his comfort zone, making him believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the steady, risk-free existence he had always known. A year later, they were married. Ryan thought he finally found his perfect match. Megan's ambition didn't bother him at first. In fact, it was one of the things that had drawn him to her. She was driven, always reaching for the next big thing, whether that was a promotion at work or her next big fitness challenge. Megan had taken up running shortly after they got married, which quickly evolved into an obsession with marathons and triathlons. Ryan admired her dedication, though it left him feeling like he was chasing a shadow he could never quite catch. They bought a small house in a suburb of Columbus, a place where they could build their future. At least, that's what Ryan had thought. But soon, it became clear that Megan's focus was shifting. She started training more intensely, spending hours at the gym or out running, leaving little time for anything else. Their conversations began to revolve around her training, her diet, and her next race. It wasn't long before she brought up the idea of competing in an Ironman. "That's a huge commitment," Ryan said one evening as they sat at the kitchen table. Megan was scrolling through her phone, looking at different Ironman events across the country. "I know, but it's something I've always wanted to do," she replied without looking up. "I just need to push myself harder." "You're already pushing yourself pretty hard," he said, trying to sound supportive. He didn't want to discourage her, but the idea of her dedicating even more time to training made him uneasy. "This is different, Ryan," she said, her tone suddenly sharper. "It's the ultimate test. I can't explain it, but I need to do this." Ryan nodded, though he didn't fully understand. Megan had become so consumed by her need to achieve, to compete, that it felt like their marriage was starting to come second. It wasn't that he didn't support her goals. He did, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between them, and not in a good way. As the months passed, Megan's training schedule grew even more intense. She hired a coach, someone she'd met at the gym who had completed several Ironman races. His name was Adam Fisher, and Ryan had never met him. But Megan talked about him constantly, how great he was, how much he was helping her improve. Ryan found it a little strange how often Adam's name came up, but he pushed those thoughts aside. After all, it was just training. Adam was just helping her reach her goal. What harm could there be in that? Still, there were moments that gnawed at him, like the time Megan mentioned that Adam had adjusted her form while they were doing strength training, his hands correcting her posture, or how they often met early in the morning, long before Ryan was awake. It wasn't that Ryan was suspicious by nature, but something about the whole situation didn't sit right with him. The tipping point came one Saturday morning. Megan had left early for a long training session with Adam. Ryan had planned to spend the day doing chores around the house, but something kept nagging at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Megan and Adam's relationship than just coach and athlete. So on a whim, he decided to head to the gym where Megan trained. When he arrived, he spotted Megan immediately. She was with Adam, working through some weightlifting exercises. At first, everything seemed normal. They were laughing and talking, and Ryan could see how much Megan enjoyed the training. But then, Adam did something that made Ryan's stomach drop. He stood behind Megan, his hands on her hips as she squatted with the weights. It wasn't just a training adjustment. It was something more, something intimate. Ryan's heart raced as he watched them. Megan didn't seem uncomfortable. If anything, she looked like she was enjoying the attention. It wasn't overt, but it was enough to confirm the fear that had been building inside Ryan for months. He felt like a fool standing there, hidden in the corner of the gym, watching his wife with another man. Anger bubbled up inside him, but more than that, it was the sense of betrayal that hit him the hardest. All this time, he had convinced himself that Megan's focus on training was just part of who she was. But now he wasn't so sure. Ryan left the gym before Megan or Adam could notice him. His mind was racing, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. That evening, when Megan returned home, she was her usual energetic self, talking about her training session and the upcoming race. Ryan watched her carefully, wondering if she had any idea that he'd seen her with Adam. If she did, she didn't show it. "I think I'm ready for the Ironman in Arizona," she said excitedly, as she sat across from him at the dinner table. Ryan nodded absently. His thoughts were elsewhere, swirling in a storm of doubt and anger. He couldn't bring himself to confront her just yet, not until he had a clearer picture of what was really going on. But as the days passed, that storm inside him only grew stronger. He knew that sooner or later, he'd have to confront Megan. And when he did, there would be no turning back. The tension between Ryan and Megan simmered under the surface for weeks. Ryan couldn't shake the image of Adam's hands on Megan, and every time Megan talked about her training, it felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He had always trusted her, always believed that they were a team. But now he wasn't so sure. He wanted to confront her, but he wasn't ready. Not yet. He needed more. One evening, Megan came home from training later than usual, her face flushed with exertion. "Sorry I'm late. Adam wanted to run through a few more drills," she said as she dropped her gym bag by the door. Ryan forced a smile, but his mind was racing. "It's fine," he replied, though the words felt hollow. They sat down to dinner, and Megan launched into her usual monologue about her training, her progress, and how close she was to achieving her goal. Ryan nodded along, but his mind wasn't on the conversation. He was thinking about the gym, about Adam, about what he'd seen. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "I was at the gym the other day," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes watching Megan closely. She looked up from her plate, surprised. "Oh, I didn't see you." "I didn't stay long, just stopped by to see how you were doing." Megan smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, you should come over. I could have introduced you to Adam." "I saw you two training together," Ryan said, his voice tightening despite his efforts to keep it even. "You seemed close." Megan's smile faltered. She set her fork down and leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing slightly. "He's my coach, Ryan. Of course we're close. He's helping me reach my goal." Ryan stared at her, his mind whirling. It just looked like more than training to me. There it was, the accusation, hanging in the air between them. Megan's expression hardened, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and frustration. "Are you seriously suggesting that something's going on between me and Adam?" she asked, her voice sharp. Ryan didn't answer right away. He didn't want to believe it, but he couldn't ignore the gut feeling that had been gnawing at him for weeks. "I don't know, Megan. You spend so much time with him, and I barely see you anymore. You quit your job, your training all the time, and now this?" Megan's face flushed with anger. "This is unbelievable. I thought you supported me. I thought you understood how important this is to me." "I do," Ryan said quickly, "but it feels like your training and Adam are more important than our marriage." Megan scoffed, shaking her head. "You don't get it. This is my dream, Ryan. This is what I've been working toward for months. Adam is just my coach. That's it." Ryan wanted to believe her. He really did, but the doubt was there, festering, and it wouldn't go away. Megan stood up abruptly, pushing her chair back from the table. "I'm done with this conversation," she said, her voice cold. I'm not going to stand here and defend myself against some baseless accusation. If you can't handle the fact that I have a coach, then maybe you should take a hard look at yourself." With that, she stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Ryan alone at the table. He sat there for a long time, staring at his half-eaten plate of food. He hated this, hated the mistrust, hated the distance that had grown between them. But he couldn't shake the feeling that things were slipping out of his control. The next morning, Megan left the house early as usual. She was already gone by the time Ryan woke up, her side of the bed cold and empty. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom, staring at the neatly made bed, wondering how things had gotten so messed up. They used to be close, really close. Now it felt like they were living in different worlds. Later that day, Ryan made a decision. He needed to know the truth, and the only way to get it was to see for himself. He couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer, so he started following Megan. At first, it felt wrong, like he was crossing a line. But as the days passed, his resolve hardened. He needed to know if his suspicions were real or if he was just imagining things. He justified it by telling himself that he wasn't doing anything harmful, just observing, watching, waiting for confirmation. It didn't take long for him to get it. On a Wednesday afternoon, he left work early and drove to the gym where Megan trained. He parked across the street and waited, his heart pounding in his chest. A few minutes later, he saw Megan and Adam leaving the gym together. They weren't heading toward their cars. Instead, they walked side by side down the street, laughing and talking as if they didn't have a care in the world. Ryan followed them, staying far enough behind that they wouldn't notice him. They walked for several blocks before turning into a small cafe, the kind of place Megan had never mentioned before. Ryan parked the car and watched as they went inside, disappearing from view. He felt a sick knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't just training. This wasn't just coaching. It was something more. He waited outside for nearly an hour, his mind racing with thoughts of what they were doing, what they were saying to each other. Finally, Megan and Adam emerged, looking just as relaxed and comfortable as they had when they entered. They lingered outside for a few moments, and Ryan's heart sank as he saw Adam reach out and touch Megan's arm, his hand resting there just a little too long to be innocent. Ryan clenched the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wanted to storm out of the car, to confront them right there on the street, but something held him back. Maybe it was fear of what Megan would say, fear of what he would do. Instead, he sat there, frozen, as Megan and Adam walked away together, their voices fading into the noise of the city. That night, when Megan came home, Ryan pretended everything was fine. But inside, something had broken. He knew he couldn't go on like this much longer, but he wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. He needed to gather his strength to prepare himself for what was coming. Over the next few days, Ryan noticed more things, small, subtle signs that pointed to something being very wrong. Megan started spending more time at the gym, coming home later and later. She was always on her phone, texting someone with a smile on her face that Ryan hadn't seen in months. And when he asked her about it, she would brush him off, saying it was just a friend or training update. But Ryan knew better. He was losing her. Every day, Megan was slipping further and further away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The hardest part was that she didn't seem to care. She was so focused on her training on Adam that it felt like their marriage was nothing more than an afterthought. One evening, Ryan finally reached his breaking point. Megan came home late, again, and when Ryan asked where she'd been, she gave him the same vague answer. "I was at the gym," she said, not even looking at him as she kicked off her shoes. Ryan stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, his heart pounding. "The gym closed 2 hours ago." Megan froze, then slowly turned to face him. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, guilt, maybe, or fear, but she quickly masked it with a tight smile. "I stayed to talk with Adam," she said. "We were going over some last-minute training adjustments." Ryan stared at her, his mind swirling with anger and frustration. He couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the half-truths, the distance between them, it was all too much. "I don't believe you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Megan's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold anger. What are you saying? I'm saying that I know something's going on between you and Adam, Ryan said, his voice shaking. I've seen the way you look at him, the way he touches you. Megan's face flushed with anger, and for a moment, Ryan thought she might deny it. But instead, she turned away, walking toward the kitchen without another word. Ryan stood in the middle of the living room, his heart racing, watching Megan walk away from him like his accusations meant nothing. She had always been stubborn, but this cold indifference was something new. It felt like she was deliberately avoiding the confrontation, as if his words had no weight. For a moment, he considered going after her, forcing her to acknowledge what was happening, but he couldn't bring himself to move. The exhaustion of weeks of mistrust and pent-up frustration weighed him down. In the silence of the house, he heard the faint clinking of glasses as Megan poured herself some water in the kitchen. Ryan clenched his fists, his mind a storm of emotions. This was his wife, the woman he had chosen to spend his life with, and yet she was slipping further away with each passing day. He felt powerless, like an outsider in his own marriage. Megan had her world, her goals, her coach, Adam. And Ryan, he was just a spectator, helpless as everything unraveled. He couldn't leave it like this. Megan, he called, his voice strained. There was no answer. Megan, we need to talk. You can't just walk away every time we get close to this. His frustration was evident now, his voice louder, firmer. After a few moments, Megan appeared in the doorway, her expression guarded. She crossed her arms over her chest, leaning against the frame. What do you want me to say, Ryan? She asked, her tone flat. I want you to be honest with me, Ryan replied, his voice shaking. I need to know what's really going on between you and Adam. I can't, he paused, struggling to find the right words. I can't live like this anymore. Megan sighed and looked away, her eyes tracing the edges of the room as if searching for an escape. There's nothing going on, Ryan. He's my coach. That's it. You're being paranoid. Ryan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wanted to believe her, but the doubt gnawed at him relentlessly. I saw you too, Megan, he said quietly. I followed you. I watched you leave the gym together, laughing, going to a cafe like. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the confession. Like you were on a date. Megan's eyes snapped back to him, her expression hardening. You followed me? Her voice was laced with disbelief, as if Ryan had committed some unforgivable act. Ryan nodded, his chest tightening. Yes, I did, because I didn't know what else to do. You've been spending so much time with him, and I feel like I'm losing you. What was I supposed to think? Megan stared at him for a long moment, her face a mask of anger and disappointment. I can't believe you would do that. I thought we had trust, Ryan. I thought we were better than this. Her words cut deep, but Ryan couldn't ignore the truth. We had trust, Megan. Before all of this, before you started pulling away and shutting me out, you don't even talk to me anymore. All you do is train, and when you're not training, you're with Adam. Megan shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You don't get it. You never did. This isn't just a hobby for me, Ryan. This is my passion. This is what drives me. And Adam, he helps me stay focused. He understands what I need to do to succeed. Ryan's heart sank. And what about us? What about our marriage? Does that even matter to you anymore? For a brief moment, Ryan thought he saw something in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, maybe even regret. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Megan straightened her posture, her face hardening again. Of course it matters, Ryan, she said, her voice cold. But you're suffocating me. You can't expect me to put my entire life on hold just because you're feeling insecure. Insecure? Ryan repeated, incredulous. This isn't about insecurity, Megan. This is about you choosing everything else. Your training, your Ironman, Adam, over me. Over us. Megan didn't respond. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked away, heading upstairs without another word. Ryan stood there, frozen, the weight of the conversation crushing him. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, and Megan had just taken a step back, leaving him to fall alone. He didn't know what to do anymore. That night, Ryan slept on the couch, or at least he tried to. Sleep eluded him as his thoughts churned endlessly. He replayed their argument over and over in his head, dissecting every word, every glance, searching for a sign that things could still be fixed. But with every passing hour, it became clearer to him that the woman he had fallen in love with was no longer the same person. Sometime after midnight, Ryan got up and walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street. The neighborhood was peaceful, the streetlights casting a soft glow over the rows of houses. It was the kind of suburban calm that had once brought him comfort, but now it felt like a lie. Everything looked perfect on the outside, but inside his house, inside his life, there was nothing but turmoil. He turned away from the window, running a hand through his hair. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't keep pretending that everything would work out if they just waited long enough. Things had to change, and he knew it had to start with him. The next morning, Ryan decided to take action. He called into work and took the day off, needing the time to clear his head and figure out his next steps. He couldn't stay in this limbo any longer, waiting for Megan to make a decision about their future. If she wasn't willing to make the effort, then he would have to. By midday, Ryan had packed a small bag and loaded it into his car. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he needed to get away for a while, someplace quiet where he could think without the constant reminders of his crumbling marriage surrounding him. He left a note for Megan on the kitchen counter, simple and to the point. Asterisk, I need some time to think. I'm leaving for a few days. I hope we can talk when I get back, asterisk. It wasn't much, but it was all he could manage. He didn't know if it would make a difference, if Megan would even care that he was gone. But he couldn't stay in that house for another day, pretending that things were okay when they clearly weren't. As he drove away from their suburban home, Ryan felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Part of him was glad to be leaving, to put some distance between himself and the life that had become so suffocating. But another part of him, the part that still loved Megan despite everything, felt like he was abandoning something precious. Something that once lost could never be recovered. Ryan ended up in a small town a few hours outside of Columbus, renting a room at a quiet, no-frills motel. It was the kind of place that didn't ask questions, just handed over a key and let you be. That was exactly what he needed. The town itself was nothing special. Just a few local diners, some antique shops, and a gas station. But it was far enough from home to give Ryan the space he needed to think. For the first day, he did nothing but sit in his room, staring at the ceiling and trying to sort through his feelings. Every time he thought about Megan, his chest tightened with a mix of anger and longing. He missed her, even though he knew that the version of her he missed no longer existed. He missed the Megan who laughed with him, who held his hand while they watched TV, who cared about their future together. That Megan was gone, replaced by someone he didn't recognize. On the second day, Ryan decided to call an old friend, Evan. They hadn't spoken in months, but Evan had always been good at offering perspective, even when things were tough. Ryan needed that more than anything right now. "Hey, man," Evan's voice crackled through the phone after a few rings. "It's been a while." "Yeah," Ryan said, managing a small smile. "I've been busy." "I hear you. What's going on?" Ryan hesitated, then sighed. "It's Megan. Things are bad, Evan. Really bad." Evan listened as Ryan poured out everything. The growing distance, Megan's obsession with her training, and the way her relationship with Adam had taken over their lives. By the time Ryan finished, he felt drained, like he had finally let go of the weight he'd been carrying for so long. "Damn, man," Evan said, his voice sympathetic. "That's rough. I had no idea things were this bad." "Neither did I," Ryan admitted. "I guess I've been ignoring the signs for too long." "So, what's the plan?" Evan asked. "Are you going to confront her? Try to fix things?" Ryan paused, staring out the window of his motel room. "I don't know. I just needed to get away for a bit. Clear my head." "Well, maybe that's what you need," Evan said. "Some time to figure out what you really want. But you can't run forever, man." At some point, you're going to have to face her. And yourself. Ryan nodded, even though Evan couldn't see him. Yeah, I know. They talked for a little while longer before Ryan hung up, feeling slightly better but still uncertain about the future. The third day at the motel, Ryan woke up with a sense of clarity that he hadn't felt in weeks. The fog of uncertainty that had clouded his mind was beginning to lift, replaced by a growing resolve. He couldn't stay away forever. He had to face Megan. He had to know, once and for all, what their marriage meant to her, and if there was anything left to salvage. Ryan checked out of the motel, thanked the front desk clerk, and started the long drive back to Columbus. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, as if holding on for balance as his emotions swirled inside him. There was no more running. Whatever happened next, he had to confront the reality of his marriage head-on. By the time he arrived back home, it was late afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden light over the quiet suburban neighborhood. The house looked the same as always, a picture of calm on the outside, even though everything inside was unraveling. Ryan parked the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on him. He grabbed his bag, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The house was eerily quiet, almost as if it were holding its breath. Megan wasn't in the kitchen or the living room. Ryan wondered if she was even home. He dropped his bag by the door and headed upstairs, where he found her in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hand. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "You're back," she said, her voice flat. Ryan nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "Yeah, I'm back." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Megan didn't seem surprised by his return. If anything, she looked resigned, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. Ryan didn't want to waste any more time. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm but calm. Megan set her phone down and crossed her arms over her chest, her posture defensive. "About what?" "You know what," Ryan replied, his eyes locked on hers. "About us. About Adam. About everything." Megan sighed and stood up, pacing the room. "I don't know what you want me to say, Ryan. I've already told you, Adam is my coach, and that's it. You're making this bigger than it is." Ryan shook his head. "No, Megan. I've seen it. I've seen the way you two are together. It's not just about training. You're spending all your time with him, and you're shutting me out. Don't pretend like nothing is going on." Megan stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes flashing with frustration. "You don't understand. You never have. Training for this Ironman is everything to me, Ryan. It's all I've been working toward, and Adam is the one who helps me get there. You're just—" She stopped herself, but the words hung in the air unfinished. Ryan's heart tightened. "Just what?" Ryan pressed, his voice low. Megan hesitated, then let out a long breath. "You're just not part of that world. You never have been." Her words stung like a slap to the face. Ryan stared at her, his mind reeling. This wasn't just about Adam. It wasn't just about the Ironman. Megan had been pulling away from him for months, years even, and now he was finally hearing the truth. She had built a world for herself that didn't include him, and maybe it never had. "I see," Ryan said quietly. "So where does that leave us?" Megan looked away, her arms still crossed tightly over her chest. "I don't know," she admitted. "I love you, Ryan. But this—" She gestured around the room, as if their entire life together was contained within its walls. "This isn't enough for me anymore." Ryan felt like the ground had just shifted beneath his feet. He had suspected things were bad, but hearing her say it so plainly cut him deeper than he expected. "So what, Megan?" Ryan said, his voice rising. "You're just going to throw everything away. Our marriage, our life together. For what? For some race? For Adam?" Megan's face hardened. "It's not about Adam," she snapped. "It's about me. It's about what I need. You think this is easy for me? Do you think I wanted things to turn out this way?" Ryan took a step closer, his anger bubbling to the surface. "Then what do you want, Megan?" What do you need? Because right now, it feels like you've already made your choice. Megan met his gaze, and for the first time, Ryan saw the exhaustion in her eyes. She looked tired. Tired of fighting, tired of pretending. Maybe I have, she said softly. The words hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. He stood there, stunned, as the reality of the situation finally sank in. She wasn't going to fight for their marriage. She wasn't going to choose him. A heavy silence fell between them, and Ryan knew there was nothing left to say. The woman standing in front of him wasn't the same person he had married. Megan had changed, and their lives had diverged in ways he could never have predicted. Ryan turned away, his heart pounding in his chest. I think I need to leave, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Megan didn't argue. She didn't beg him to stay. She just stood there, watching as he grabbed his bag from the hallway and walked toward the door. As Ryan opened the door, Megan spoke again, her voice soft. Ryan, I'm sorry. He paused for a moment, his hand resting on the door handle. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he nodded once, then walked out of the house, the door closing behind him with a quiet click. The drive away from the house felt surreal, like a dream Ryan couldn't wake from. He had known this confrontation was coming, but nothing could have prepared him for how final it felt. There was no yelling, no dramatic explosion, just the quiet realization that the life he had built with Megan was over. He found himself driving aimlessly through the city, unsure of where to go or what to do. The streets of Columbus, once familiar and comforting, now felt foreign and cold. Eventually, he pulled into a parking lot near the park where he and Megan used to take walks when they first moved to the city. He sat there in his car, staring out at the empty park benches, his mind blank. For years, Ryan had imagined a future with Megan, kids, a house, a life together. Now, all of that felt like a distant memory, something from another life. He had never been a man who chased excitement or adventure, but he had always believed in stability, in building something that would last. And now, all of that was gone. As the hours passed, Ryan's mind wandered back to their argument, replaying her words over and over. Megan had said she still loved him, but what did that even mean anymore? How could love coexist with the distance that had grown between them? His phone buzzed in the passenger seat, pulling him out of his thoughts. He picked it up and saw a message from Evan. Asterisk, hey man, just checking in. How's everything going, asterisk? Ryan stared at the message for a long time before replying. Asterisk, not great. I think it's over, asterisk. Evan's reply came quickly. Asterisk, sorry to hear that. Do you want to talk, asterisk? Ryan hesitated, then typed out a response. Asterisk, not right now. I just need some time, asterisk. Evan didn't push. He sent a simple reply. Asterisk, I'm here when you're ready, asterisk. Ryan appreciated it. He wasn't ready to talk, wasn't ready to put into words the weight of what he was feeling. He didn't even know how to explain it to himself, let alone someone else. As the sky darkened and the streetlights flickered on, Ryan made a decision. He couldn't sit in that parking lot forever, and he wasn't going back to the house. Not tonight, maybe not ever. He started the car and drove to the one place he knew he could find some peace, the same motel he had stayed at a few days earlier. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and for now, that was all he needed. Just some quiet. Just some space to breathe. When he checked into the motel, the clerk recognized him from before. Back again? She asked with a small smile. Yeah, Ryan said, his voice flat. Just needed a place for the night. She handed him the key and wished him a good evening, but Ryan barely heard her. He made his way to the room, dropped his bag by the bed, and collapsed onto the mattress. His mind was racing, but his body felt heavy, weighed down by exhaustion. Ryan stared up at the ceiling, the events of the day playing over and over in his head. There was no going back now. Megan had made her choice, and so had he. For the first time in months, Ryan allowed himself to think about what came next. Not just the next few days, but the future without Megan. The future he would have to build from scratch. It terrified him, but at the same time, There was a strange sense of relief. The next morning, Ryan woke up to the dim light seeping through the curtains of the motel room. For a moment, he forgot where he was. The unfamiliar surroundings, the neutral-colored walls, the hum of the outdated air conditioning unit reminded him that he wasn't home. The realization settled in with a heavy weight. He wasn't going back, not to the house, not to Megan. Ryan sat up in bed, running a hand through his hair as the events of the past few days washed over him. The confrontation with Megan, her cold indifference, and the stark clarity that their marriage had reached its end. It all felt like a blur, like something that had happened to someone else. But it was real. It was his life now. He glanced at his phone. No messages from Megan. A small part of him had hoped she might call or at least send a text, something to indicate she cared about what had happened between them. But there was nothing. It was as if she had already moved on, leaving him to pick up the pieces alone. Ryan sighed and stood up, pacing the small room. He had to figure out what came next. The house was still there, full of memories and things he built with Megan, but it no longer felt like home. The thought of returning there made him feel sick. He needed a fresh start, away from the reminders of the life that had fallen apart. After a quick shower, Ryan grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He stopped at Evan's name, staring at it for a long moment before finally hitting call. Evan answered on the second ring. "Hey man, how are you holding up?" Ryan let out a long breath. "Not great. I left. It's over." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Evan's voice, softer now. "Dan, I'm sorry to hear that. You want to talk about it?" Ryan sat down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "There's not much to say. She basically admitted that I wasn't part of her life anymore. She's all in with her training and her coach. I couldn't compete with that." Evan sighed. "That's rough. You did everything you could, man. Sometimes people just grow apart." "Yeah," Ryan muttered, though the words offered little comfort. He leaned back against the headboard, staring up at the ceiling. "I'm just trying to figure out what to do now. I can't stay at the house. I don't even know if I want to stay in Columbus." "Why don't you come stay with me for a bit?" Evan offered. "I've got plenty of space. We can hang out, clear your head, figure out your next move. You don't have to decide anything right away." Ryan hesitated. He didn't want to impose, but the idea of staying with Evan, away from the house, away from everything that reminded him of Megan, was tempting. Maybe a change of scenery was exactly what he needed. "Yeah," Ryan said finally. "I think I'll take you up on that." "Great," Evan said, sounding relieved. "Come by whenever. I'll be around." After hanging up, Ryan packed his things and checked out of the motel. He felt a small sense of relief as he got into the car and started the drive to Evan's place. Evan lived on the outskirts of Columbus, in a quiet neighborhood that was far enough from the city to feel like an escape, but close enough to still be convenient. Ryan had always envied how Evan seemed to have his life together. Steady job, nice house, no major drama. It felt like a world away from the chaos of Ryan's own life. When Ryan arrived at Evan's place, he was greeted with a bear hug and a cold beer. They settled into the living room, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Ryan felt a small sense of calm. "You can crash here for as long as you need," Evan said, handing Ryan the beer. "No pressure to make any big decisions. Just take your time." "Thanks, man," Ryan replied, grateful for Evan's easygoing nature. He took a sip of the beer and leaned back on the couch, feeling the tension in his shoulders start to ease. For the next few days, Ryan tried to find a new rhythm. He didn't go to work. He wasn't ready to face the questions or the awkward conversations about his sudden absence. Instead, he spent his time with Evan, talking through everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it all. Evan listened patiently, offering advice when Ryan needed it and silence when he didn't. "I know it sucks right now," Evan said one evening as they sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "But it'll get better. I've been through a breakup or two in my day, and I can tell you, it feels like the end of the world at first. But eventually, you'll come out the other side." Ryan nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it yet. The pain was still too fresh, the wound too raw. But he appreciated Evan's optimism. It was a reminder that there was life beyond this, even if Ryan couldn't see it right now. As the days passed, Ryan started to feel the urge to confront the practical realities of his situation. He needed to figure out what to do about the house, the bills, the logistics of splitting up their lives. But every time he thought about calling Megan, his stomach churned. He wasn't ready to deal with that yet. One afternoon, Ryan's phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. The message was simple. Asterisk, do you want to move forward with a legal separation or divorce? Let me know how you want to proceed, asterisk. Ryan stared at the message for a long time, the words blurring together. Divorce. The final step. He had been avoiding it, hoping that maybe, somehow, things would work themselves out. But deep down, he knew that wasn't going to happen. Megan had made her choice. Now he had to make his. With a heavy sigh, Ryan typed out a reply. Asterisk, let's move forward with the divorced asterisk. A week later, Ryan met with his lawyer to go over the details. The legal process was straightforward enough. Ohio didn't require a long separation period, and since Ryan and Megan didn't have kids, the division of assets was relatively simple. The hardest part would be dealing with the house. Ryan didn't want to keep it, and he doubted Megan did either. But selling it meant going through the process of listing it, showing it to buyers, and dealing with the memories that clung to every room. As they sat in the lawyer's office, signing paperwork and discussing next steps, Ryan felt a strange sense of detachment. It was as if he were watching someone else's life unfold, someone else's marriage end. He signed the divorce papers with a numb hand, his mind elsewhere. Once we file these, you're looking at a few months before everything's finalized, the lawyer said. If there are no complications, it should be pretty smooth. Ryan nodded. Thanks. I appreciate it. The lawyer gave him a sympathetic smile. I know this isn't easy, but you're doing the right thing. Ryan left the office feeling drained, but also lighter in a way. The decision had been made. There was no going back now. He was free to move on, even if he didn't know what that looked like yet. Over the next few weeks, Ryan started the slow process of rebuilding his life. He began looking for a new place to live, something small and temporary until he figured out his next steps. He reconnected with a few old friends, filling his days with work and distractions, trying to keep the thoughts of Megan and Adam at bay. But no matter how hard he tried, the memories lingered. He would catch himself thinking about her at random moments, when he passed a restaurant they used to go to, or when a song they used to listen to came on the radio. It was like a dull ache, always there, just beneath the surface. One evening, as Ryan sat on Evan's porch, nursing a beer and watching the sunset, his phone buzzed with a new message. He glanced at the screen, and his heart skipped a beat. It was from Megan. Asterisk, we need to talk about the house. Can we meet? Asterisk. Ryan stared at the message, his mind racing. Part of him didn't want to respond, didn't want to open that door again. But he knew they couldn't avoid this forever. They had unfinished business to deal with. After a long pause, Ryan typed out a reply. Asterisk, okay. Let's meet tomorrow, asterisk. He hit send and leaned back in his chair, a sense of dread settling in his chest. Tomorrow, he would see Megan again, and for the first time since they had parted ways, they would have to face the reality of what their marriage had become. Ryan didn't know what to expect from the conversation. Maybe it would be purely practical, just a discussion about logistics. Or maybe it would bring up all the emotions he had been trying so hard to bury. Either way, he had no choice. It was time to face the past. The next day, Ryan drove to the cafe where he and Megan had agreed to meet. It was a small place on the edge of town, one they had gone to a few times early in their relationship. The irony wasn't lost on him. The place that had once been the setting for their carefree, happy moments was now where they would discuss the practicalities of ending everything. He parked his car and sat for a few minutes, staring at the entrance. His heart was pounding, and his palms were sweaty. He didn't know what to expect from Megan, whether she would be distant, defensive, or maybe even regretful. The unknown felt suffocating. Finally, he took a deep breath, grabbed his keys, and stepped out of the car. The moment he walked into the cafe, he saw her. Megan was sitting by the window, looking out at the street, her fingers nervously twisting a napkin. She hadn't seen him yet, and for a second, Ryan stood frozen, taking her in. She looked thinner, more tired than he remembered. The familiar pain of longing hit him, but he pushed it aside. There was no place for that now. He walked over to the table, and she looked up, their eyes meeting for the first time in weeks. There was an awkward tension between them, like they were two strangers trying to remember how to speak to each other. "Hey," Ryan said quietly as he sat down. "Hey," Megan replied, her voice soft. She looked down at her hands, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence was heavy, filled with all the things they hadn't said during the past few months. "I'm glad you came," Megan said, breaking the silence. "I've been thinking about everything, and we need to figure out what to do with the house. We can't just leave it in limbo." Ryan nodded. "I know. I've been thinking about that too. I don't want to live there, and I doubt you do either." Megan shook her head. "No, I don't. I think we should sell it." Ryan had expected this. It was the logical choice, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. Selling the house meant letting go of the last tangible thing they had built together. It meant accepting that there was no going back. "Okay," Ryan said, his voice steady even though his emotions weren't. "We'll put it on the market." Megan looked relieved, as if she had been worried he would fight her on it. "Good. I'd already talked to a realtor. She said we could probably get it sold pretty quickly." Ryan nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He could feel the finality of it all, like the walls of their marriage were closing in. This was it. They were dividing up the pieces of their life, and soon there would be nothing left but memories. "Ryan." Megan's voice wavered, and when he looked up, he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before: regret. "I'm sorry. For everything." Ryan felt a lump form in his throat. He had waited weeks, months, even for those words. But now that they were here, they didn't bring the closure he thought they would. "I didn't mean for things to end like this," Megan continued. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Ryan's jaw tightened and he leaned back in his chair. "I know you didn't mean to, but it still happened." Megan looked down, her hands twisting the napkin again. I got so caught up in the training and the race, and I lost sight of what was important. I don't know when I stopped caring about us." Ryan's heart ached as he listened. He wanted to tell her that it wasn't too late, that they could still fix things. But he knew that wasn't true. Too much had happened. Too many bridges had been burned. They couldn't go back to the way things were. "It wasn't just the training, Megan," Ryan said, his voice low but firm. "It was everything. You shut me out. You stopped letting me be part of your life." Megan's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Ryan saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the one who had made him feel alive, who had pushed him out of his comfort zone and made him believe in something more. But that woman was gone now, replaced by someone he barely recognized. "I know," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize how far apart we'd grown until it was too late." Ryan swallowed hard, the pain of her words settling in his chest. "It was too late a long time ago," he said softly. "We just didn't want to admit it." They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of everything that had gone unsaid hanging between them. Megan wiped at her eyes and took a deep breath. "So where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ryan thought about it for a moment. There was no easy answer, no clear path forward. But he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't keep holding on to the past. He had to let go for both their sakes. "I think we need to move on," Ryan said, his voice steady now. "You've got your life, and I've got mine. The divorce papers are already in motion. Once we sell the house, we can both start over." Megan nodded slowly, her eyes full of sadness. "Yeah, I guess you're right." Ryan forced a small, sad smile. "I didn't think it would end like this." "Neither did I," Megan replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat there for a while longer, talking about the practical details. How they would handle the sale of the house, how they would divide up the remaining belongings. It was all business now, the emotional part of their relationship long gone. But as they talked, Ryan felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the ending he had hoped for, but it was an ending nonetheless. After they finished talking, Megan stood up, her expression resigned. "I should get going. Thanks for meeting with me." Ryan stood as well, feeling the finality of the moment. "Yeah. Take care, Megan." She gave him a sad smile, then turned and walked out of the cafe. Ryan watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. This was the last time they would see each other like this, as husband and wife. The next time, they would be two people with separate lives, separate futures. As Ryan walked out of the cafe, he felt the weight of the past few months lift slightly. There was still a long road ahead, selling the house, finalizing the divorce. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. The door to his old life was closing. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe, just maybe, he could find something new on the other side. He drove back to Evan's house, the sun setting behind him. The horizon was full of color, orange and pink streaks lighting up the sky. It felt symbolic in a way, a sign that even after the darkest storms, there was always the possibility of light. Ryan didn't know what the future held. He didn't have all the answers yet, and he wasn't sure where life would take him next. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't holding on to something that wasn't there. He was ready to move forward, and that was enough. Back at Evan's, Ryan stepped out of the car, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Evan was sitting on the porch, a beer in hand, watching the last of the sunset fade into the night. "How'd it go?" Evan asked as Ryan approached. Ryan sat down beside him, grabbing the beer Evan had left for him on the table. "It's done. We're selling the house. And the divorce, it's happening." Evan nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "How do you feel about it?" Ryan thought for a moment, letting the silence settle around them. "I don't know. Sad, I guess, but also relieved. It's like I can finally let go." Evan smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "That's progress, man. You'll get through this." Ryan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, I think I will." And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Ryan realized that he was finally ready to close the chapter on this part of his life and begin a new one that was his own, free from the weight of the past. It wouldn't be easy, but he wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in a long time, Ryan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.